What if the most important front line in this war is not in Ukraine at all? What if the battlefield that truly determines how long Russia can continue fighting is not measured in kilometers of territory captured or lost, but in tons of cargo moving across a railway network that is slowly grinding to a halt? What if the collapse everyone is waiting for does not arrive with an explosion? What if it arrives with a spreadsheet? Year by year, everyone is watching the front lines in Ukraine. The advances, the retreats, the artillery duels, the drone strikes. But another story is unfolding inside the Kremlin, and it has nothing to do with trenches. It has everything to do with trains. According to reports released in January 2026, Russia's state railway monopoly recorded its steepest freight decline in 16 years. During 2025, freight volumes fell to levels not seen since the global financial crisis. The Ukraine Center for Countering Disinformation described this as another sign of mounting pressure across key sectors of the Russian economy. But here is the question that matters. Why does a statistic about freight trains matter more than most military reports? Because a missile does not begin its life inside a launcher. It begins years earlier, inside factories, inside supply chains, inside a system most people never see. And that system runs on rails. At first glance, rail freight volume sounds like a dry economic indicator, something for economists to debate in academic journals, something unrelated to the war. But in reality, it tells a much deeper story about the health of a nation fighting a prolonged conflict. Freight trains measure the movement of the real economy. Unlike headline economic figures, which can be influenced by government spending or statistical methods, freight trains transport physical goods that industries depend on every day. Coal, steel, timber, grain, construction materials, industrial raw materials, fuel, machinery. All of it moves across Russia's vast railway network. If fewer trains are carrying these goods, it means factories are producing less, mines are shipping less, construction activity is slowing, export demand is weakening. The reported figures point to declines across several important sectors. Grain shipments fell by more than 12%, construction materials by more than 10%, timber by almost 6%. But the steepest declines were recorded in industrial raw materials and ferrous metals, down 16% and 17.7% respectively. These are not luxury goods. They form the backbone of heavy industry and infrastructure. For a country as geographically vast as Russia, railways are far more than a transportation service. They are the country's logistical backbone. Most heavy cargo cannot realistically be moved over thousands of kilometers by truck alone. Rail connects mines to factories, factories to ports, and military bases to supply depots. It is one of the few systems that links nearly every major industrial region across the country. This is also why military analysts pay close attention to railway performance. Russia has historically relied on rail to transport tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, fuel, ammunition, engineering equipment, and replacement personnel over long distances. Trucks usually handle only the final stretch to frontline positions. The railway network carries the overwhelming logistical burden before those supplies ever reach the battlefield. So when freight volumes fall, it is not just an economic problem. It is a strategic warning that the declining freight volumes are only the first layer of this story. As freight volumes continued to fall, Russian railways found itself facing a second, and perhaps even more alarming challenge: an escalating debt burden. According to reports published in January 2026, the company's total debt had climbed to approximately 4 trillion rubles, about $45 billion US. For a company that serves as the backbone of Russia's transportation network, this is a figure that has drawn growing attention from economists and geopolitical analysts alike. The timing makes the situation especially significant. Freight transportation is the primary source of revenue for Russian railways, and those freight volumes have reportedly been declining for 4 consecutive years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. Simply put, fewer goods moving across the network means fewer opportunities to generate income from the company's most profitable business segment. But debt by itself does not necessarily indicate crisis. Large infrastructure companies often borrow heavily to finance long-term projects. The concern arises when debt continues to rise while the company's core business, moving freight, is simultaneously weakening. In that situation, higher borrowing costs, reduced cash flow, and declining investment can reinforce one another, making recovery increasingly difficult. And that is exactly what appears to be happening. Reports indicate that authorities attempted to offset declining civilian freight by increasing military transportation. Cargo linked to defense logistics, including equipment shipments, continues to move across the network. Reports also noted that approximately 19 Zaro containers had reportedly been shipped by rail from North Korea to Russia. However, the available reporting suggests that military cargo alone has not fully compensated for the broader decline in commercial freight. Now consider what this means for the people who actually operate the railway. According to a report published by Promars v. Edico in March 2026, around 200 shift workers employed by Novalex Holding Company found themselves trapped while working on the construction of the Volkovskaya mining and processing plant near Nizhny Tagil. What was supposed to be a well-paid rotational job reportedly turned into months of uncertainty after wages stopped arriving in September 2025. The workers alleged that the company not only delayed their salaries, but also stopped paying for meals and refused to purchase tickets that would allow them to return home. Many of these employees had traveled hundreds or even thousands of kilometers for work, leaving them with few options once the payments stopped. Without income, they reportedly struggled to pay mortgages, utility bills, and other everyday expenses, while penalties and late fees continued to accumulate. In a desperate attempt to draw attention to their situation, the workers recorded a video appeal addressed to Alexander Bastrykin, the chairman of Russia's investigative committee. Their message described what they believed had become an impossible situation. They were left with no money, no food, and nowhere to leave. But the financial pressure facing Russian railways was no longer confined to spreadsheets and debt figures. By early 2026, the company was reportedly making decisions that directly affected its workforce. When a strategic state-owned enterprise begins reducing staff, cutting operating costs, and restructuring its organization, it often signals that management expects financial challenges to continue, rather than disappear quickly. In March 2026, the Moscow Times reported that Russian Railways plan to cut approximately 15% of its central administrative workforce, amounting to around 6,000 positions. According to CEO Balazar, the reductions would extend beyond entry-level employees and include senior management positions across various branches. The objective was to reduce costs and stabilize the company's finances after a difficult year. But here is the deeper problem. Cutting administrative staff does not fix the core issue. The core issue is that fewer trains are moving fewer goods, and no amount of layoffs can change that. The deeper analysts looked into Russian Railways' financial statements. The clearer it became, the company's problems extended well beyond declining freight traffic. One figure in particular stood out. It wasn't revenue. It wasn't debt. It wasn't even investment. It was profit. And the scale of the decline suggested that even aggressive cost-cutting was no longer enough to shield the company from mounting financial pressure. In March 2026, newly released financial statements revealed just how dramatically Russian Railways' profitability had deteriorated. According to the company's IFRS financial statements, net profit for 25 fell from 507 billion rubles to just 22 billion rubles, a staggering 20-fold decline in a single year, while the company technically remained profitable. The difference between those two figures illustrates how much more difficult it had become to operate under current economic conditions. At first glance, one number appears almost contradictory. Revenue actually increased by 10.4%, reaching approximately 3.6 trillion rubles. Normally, higher revenue would suggest a healthier business. But in this case, the increase did not translate into stronger profits. Instead, it highlighted the growing gap between money coming in and the rapidly rising costs of keeping one of the world's largest railway networks operating. The freight volume decline was one major factor, but there was another. Borrowing costs were climbing rapidly. The company reportedly added around 800 billion rubles in new debt during 2025, pushing its total obligations to approximately 3.8 trillion rubles. Higher interest rates meant that servicing this debt became far more expensive. According to the financial statements, debt repayment costs reached 534.1 billion rubles, placing additional pressure on the company's finances. Management responded with aggressive cost-cutting. The 2025 investment program covering major construction projects, railway modernization, locomotives, and rail car purchases was reportedly reduced by roughly 40%, falling from 1.5 trillion rubles to about 890 billion rubles. But here is the problem with cutting investment. It may help preserve cash in the short term, but it can also delay infrastructure upgrades and modernization projects that support long-term efficiency. Russian Railways also reportedly sought 200 billion rubles in emergency financing from Russia's National Welfare Fund. According to reports, the government declined that request. Instead, authorities encouraged the company to pursue refinancing, restructure existing debt, reduce operating costs, and generate cash by selling assets. As a result, valuable properties including railway facilities, maintenance depots, commercial real estate, and a 49% stake in the federal freight company were reportedly placed on the market. But the financial problems we've discussed so far are only part of the picture. Debt can be refinanced. Losses can sometimes be recovered. Investments can eventually resume. But what happens when the railway network itself begins experiencing operational problems? When trains are delayed? When locomotives are in short supply? When workers are missing? When freight cars sit idle for months? The challenge shifts from finance to functionality. And that is exactly why many analysts have been paying close attention to the day-to-day condition of Russia's railway system. According to the report, one of the most detailed assessments of these operational challenges came from railway supply, citing analysis by OC&T researcher Chris Witty. According to the report, Russian railways entered one of the most difficult periods in its modern history, with problems extending far beyond declining revenue. Instead, the network itself was reportedly struggling with congestion, equipment shortages, labor deficits, and falling freight activity all at the same time. Among the most striking claims, approximately 300 Zero freight wagons representing about 20% of Russia's wagon fleet were reportedly sitting idle. Rather than transporting cargo, these rail cars were said to be occupying sidings, depots, and marshalling yards, reducing the overall efficiency of the network. The report even described cases where freight trains had reportedly remained stationary for extended periods, illustrating how operational bottlenecks can spread across an entire railway system. The labor situation added another layer of complexity. According to the report, some divisions of Russian railways were operating with staffing levels far below their requirements, while shortages of locomotive drivers and train crews reportedly forced the cancellation of around 200 trains every day. The analysis attributed these shortages to several factors: an aging workforce, difficult working conditions, competition from better-minded paying military service, and broader labor market pressures associated with the wartime economy. Freight volumes also continued to move in the wrong direction. The report stated that cargo transportation had fallen for 20 consecutive months, with declines affecting a wide range of industries: timber exports, ferrous metals, coal, fertilizers, construction related materials, all reportedly experienced lower shipment volumes. These sectors are closely tied to heavy industry, mining, manufacturing, and exports, making railway activity an important indicator of broader economic conditions. Now consider where this leads. According to the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which regularly publish official estimates of Russian military losses, Russia had suffered significant personnel and equipment losses as of June 2026. Ukraine estimated that approximately 400 to 1,200 Russian military personnel had been killed or wounded since the start of the full-scale invasion. The figures also included estimated losses of 12,066 tanks, 24,845 armored fighting vehicles, 44,916 artillery systems, 1901 multiple launch rocket systems, 1,454 air defense systems, 436 aircraft, 353 helicopters, and more than 113 Zero military vehicles and fuel tankers. It is important to emphasize that these are official Ukrainian estimates and have not been independently verified. Russia publishes different assessments of battlefield losses, and independent verification remains extremely difficult during an ongoing war. But even so, one broader reality is widely recognized by military analysts. Prolonged warfare places enormous demands on logistics. Every damaged vehicle that requires repair, every artillery system that must be replaced, every shipment of ammunition, every fuel convoy, every rotation of personnel. All of it depends on an extensive transportation network operating behind the front lines. For Russia, railways remain the backbone of that long-distance logistics system. Heavy armored vehicles, artillery pieces, engineering equipment, large quantities of ammunition. All are generally transported by rail over vast distances before being moved closer to combat zones by road. This method is significantly more efficient than attempting to move such heavy equipment entirely by truck across thousands of kilometers. That is why the condition of Russian railways matters far beyond economics. That is why this story is not about trains. It is about whether a nation can continue to fight when the system that supplies its war machine is slowly grinding to a halt. But here is the deeper question. How long can a war be sustained when the railway that carries everything coal, steel, ammunition, tanks, fuel, and personnel is operating under this level of strain? The report further argued that while military cargo had increased since 2022, it remained too small to fully compensate for the decline in civilian freight. as more railway capacity was reportedly allocated to defense-related shipments. Some commercial cargo shifted to road transport instead. While trucks can provide flexibility over shorter distances, they generally cannot match the efficiency of rail when moving massive quantities of heavy industrial goods across thousands of kilometers. Even the report's outlook remained cautious. It argued that ending the war or easing sanctions alone would not automatically restore the railway system to full strength. Rebuilding a skilled workforce, replacing aging locomotives, modernizing infrastructure, restoring freight demand, all of that would likely require years, rather than months. Now consider the warning signs that appeared much earlier. Long before the company started cutting jobs and selling assets, it was reportedly struggling with a problem that is far less visible but absolutely essential to keeping trains moving: maintaining its locomotives. Without reliable engines, even the most extensive railway network cannot operate at full capacity. One of the earliest indicators of this growing problem emerged in February 2024. Russian railways had a shortage of locomotives due to a lack of imported parts. According to reports, the issue had become especially noticeable during the final months of 2023, as repairs became slower and more difficult. The core challenge was not necessarily the total number of locomotives owned by Russian railways. Instead, the problem was how many of those locomotives were actually available for service at any given time. As more engines spent longer periods undergoing repairs, fewer were available to pull freight trains across the country's enormous rail network. In practical terms, the railway could own thousands of locomotives. But if a growing number remained inside maintenance depots waiting for replacement parts, the network's effective transport capacity would still decline. According to reports, one major reason for the delays was the reduced availability of imported components following Western sanctions imposed after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Service companies reportedly encountered increasing difficulty obtaining specialized bearings, proprietary electronic components, lubricants, and other parts that had previously been sourced from foreign suppliers. Without those components, repair work often took significantly longer than before. The situation reportedly became particularly severe on the Sverdlovsk Railway, where large numbers of locomotives remained out of service awaiting repairs. Sources cited by Vedomosti also claimed that some locomotives returned to service before maintenance had been fully completed, increasing the likelihood of additional mechanical failures during operations. Whether these reports reflected isolated cases or broader maintenance challenges, they highlighted the importance of reliable supply chains for such a complex transportation system. Industry analyst Mikhail Burr, Mr. Ovi, General Director of Infoline Analytics, explained that service providers normally aim to keep around 95% of the locomotive fleet technically ready for operation. According to his assessment, that readiness rate had already fallen to 93% by mid-2023, and declined even further by January 2024. While the difference of only a few percentage points may appear small, across a fleet of roughly 20 locomotives, it represents hundreds of engines unavailable for daily service. The reports also pointed to another labor challenge. In addition to shortages of imported parts, mobilization and broader workforce pressures reportedly made it more difficult to recruit and retain experienced maintenance personnel. Russia accelerated the production and introduction of domestically manufactured equipment, but analysts noted that some newer systems experienced what engineers often describe as childhood diseases, meaning early technical issues that commonly arise with newly developed technology before reliability improves over time. So here is the emerging picture: a railway network operating with fewer locomotives, longer repair times, shortages of skilled workers, declining freight volumes, rising debt, and a war that demands more from this system every day. Taken together, these reported developments suggest that the challenges facing Russian railways extend beyond temporary financial losses. They involve the practical ability of one of the world's largest rail networks to efficiently move the raw materials, industrial goods, commercial exports, and military cargo that underpin both Russia's economy and its long-distance logistics. Whether these pressures prove temporary or become longer-term structural challenges remains one of the most important questions surrounding Russia's wartime economy. Because modern war is not decided by the weapons that are fired, it is decided by the systems that produce and transport them. The tank is not the weapon. The factory that produces the tank is the weapon. The railway that moves the tank to the front is the weapon. The fuel that powers the tank is the weapon. And when the railway begins to fail, the tank becomes useless. Not because it was destroyed in battle, but because it never arrived. What you have just witnessed is not a report about trains. It is not a summary of freight statistics or debt figures. It is a glimpse into the hidden war. The war that happens before the missiles are fired. The war that happens after the equipment is produced. The war that determines whether a nation can continue fighting or whether it must stop. Because the true battlefield is not only in Ukraine. It is in the factories that cannot produce replacement parts. It is in the depots where locomotives sit idle. It is in the rail lines where freight trains are no longer moving. It is in the